Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you to everyone for having me today. It is really a bracha and an honor to be back with all of you. Our practice today on this day is going to really focus on cultivation. It's a cultivation practice of compassion. And it's something that I think we so desperately need for ourselves, for one another, for those with whom we are in alignment, for those with whom we're having difficulty. We know that the past many, many months have been incredibly painful, multi-layered. We're all coming and arriving in this space of practice and taking refuge in practice from so many different places. And wherever you are and however you are in this moment, you are so warmly welcome in this space. Showing up for practice and taking the time for ourselves to really rest in the luminescence of practice is so important, all the more so in these times. And I find for my own soul and for my own spirituality that it has been an anchor and really something that I return to again and again. So as we move into practice today, as we move into thinking about a compassion practice, I want to talk a bit about how this really aligns in so many ways with where we're moving in the Omer. As we learned a few moments ago, we are in the final day, at least where I am physically located. We are still in the final day of the third week of the Omer, Malchut V'Tiferet, and we're going to be moving into Chesed Sheb'Netzach, into loving kindness within steadfastness. There are lots of different ways that we could translate Netzach, but I'm going to go with steadfastness today. There's something really beautiful about the steadiness of it and the way in which it's there for us, as are all of the different qualities that we work with during this time. Compassion is so important, not only for others, but really as a cultivation of a heart-centered practice for ourselves. And as we're moving into working with steadfastness, as we're moving into this week of Netzach, and we're starting with Chesed, and then we're going to move into Gevurah, we're finding ways to allow that flow to find its containment. I thought about this a lot also when we were in the week of Gevurah, how we let the flow of Chesed rest in the container of Gevurah. And so too, when we work with Netzach, we're allowing that flow of Chesed, that abundant divine flow of Chesed, to rest within a certain steadfastness of awareness. And for me, that aligns with the notion of waking up to the places in myself where I am closed, where my heart feels hard, where my heart feels unable to open. And it allows me to also awaken to the parts of myself that feel really easeful. It allows me to awaken to the places where my heart can feel open, where I can feel a certain sense of connection. And it allows me to do that work of cultivating a practice of trying to find or cultivate connection in those places that feel stuck, that feel really tricky and really hard, those places that feel like they don't want to move, those places that just are almost completely just impenetrable, like unable to move ahead. And I noticed that in my own practice. I noticed that in my own life off of the cushion. And I want to bring us today into practice of allowing ourselves with a deep sense of ease and love to cultivate or begin to really work on our own hearts. Some of us might find in this moment that we're grappling with a lot of different mixed emotions and have been for many months. Some of us might feel like we've been moving in and out of spaces of connection and disconnection. And that can change over the course of a day. It can change over the course of an hour, even. Some of us are feeling like we can't open to the pain because the pain is enormous. And some of us are feeling like we want to find joy when we can and where we can, but are unable to feel that joy amidst the pain, or might feel like we can't have that kind of access. Some of us still might feel like the practice of self-compassion is extraordinarily difficult to even think about in a time like this. Something, though, that I learn again and again from showing up to my own practice is that when I am able to tend to my own soul and my own need for compassion, I'm able to show up so much better in my life in its fullness, in all different areas. And with that as our guide, I'm now going to invite us to freely choose someone or a group, be yourself. It could be a specific group of people. It could be somebody in your life. It could be somebody in the broader world. It could be somebody in the land we call sacred, whomever that is, wherever that is, to really work with, to anchor our practice into sending wishes of well-being and compassion. We might have a phrase that really works for us that we might want to use as an anchor. May you be blessed with compassion is one that I plan to practice with in this moment. We might choose things like, may you be blessed with peace, may you be blessed with ease, or you might have something that really anchors you. And I encourage and welcome you to use that in this moment. And you might find that this is a practice that isn't landing today, that you're just not in the right space for it for any number of very understandable reasons. And if that is true for you in this moment, then you are warmly and welcome and encouraged to practice in the way that feels most authentic and aligned with your heart's desire. So with that as our opening, I want to invite us now into about 10 minutes of practice. And again, we're choosing a group or a person or ourselves as our anchor to send thoughts and phrases of loving compassion to, whomever that is for you in this moment. So we will move into practice now. If you find your mind wandering with love and compassion, we gently guide it back. And if you find that you've chosen a person or a group and that isn't landing, you might choose something else. And if you've been working with one phrase and you feel ready to move on to another, you might choose to move on to another. In our last few minutes of practice together, you might find it supportive to put a hand on the heart or a hand on the stomach as a way of helping support your practice of compassion and cultivating your heart's desire in this moment. In our last minute of practice together, I'm going to invite us with ease and intention to slowly move from one practice into the next practice of returning to our sacred Zoom space and allowing ourselves in these last few moments to find what we need in our heart-centered practice of compassion for ourselves, for each other, for the world. Thank you all so much for joining me for practice today. It is so important to show up for this practice, to take refuge in this space, and to be with what is. Thank you all for taking the time for yourselves, taking the time for each other to be in community together. It's really an honor. And I'm going to now turn it over to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Lauren Tuchman and friends. We can practice compassion right now by creating space for those who are mourning or grieving to recite the mourner's Kaddish. Either if you're in mourning right now, if you have a yard site, an anniversary of death, or if it's your custom to join in the mourner's Kaddish, you can do so, and you can put the name or names of those you're honoring today in the chat now or after you recite Kaddish. And everyone else can practice compassion by creating a minyan of comfort for those who are reciting it, who I invite to join me by rising in body or in spirit. At this time, you can unmute for sharing the words on the screen for those who need it. And again, if you're reciting Kaddish, please join me by rising in body or in spirit. And you can unmute at this time. Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabba.
Shemei Rabba,
Yama Dibra Sivute,
Yamlicht
Yamlich Malchute,
Malchute,
Kayekom,
V'chayekon
Yom
Yom Echad,
V'yet Kol Beit
V'chayet
Yisrael, Ba'agala, U'bizman Karib, V'yimru, Amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shmei
Shemei
Rabba
Rabba,
Barach, Le'olam U'lamei Amayad.
Yes,
Yitbarach V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar V'yitramam V'yitnaseh, Yithadar V'yitaleh V'yithalal Shmei Tekudusha B'richu.
grateful.
La'ela Mikol Birchata B'shurata. Tuchmata B'nechamata Da'amiran Ba'alma V'yimru.
Amen.
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 Yehi Shlama Rabba Mishemaya. Chaim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael. V'yimru. Amen.
Amen.
Aseh Shalom B'mramav. Huya Aseh Shalom. Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael. V'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel. V'yimru. Amen.
Amen.
And friends, thanks so much for joining us today. I want to thank our teacher, Rabbi Lauren Tuchman, for leading us in this compassion practice today, this Yom HaAtzmaut. And if you're leaving us now, we have very delighted to encourage people to join us tomorrow when Rabbi Dorothy Richman will be leading us in practice. And the following day, our friend Zach Newman from Hamakom in the United Kingdom will be leading us in practice on Thursday. So please do join us if you're leaving us now. One announcement, which I didn't share at the beginning, I didn't have a chance to squeeze it in, is that there's a new episode of Josh Fagelson's podcast, Soulful Jewish Living, which is out, which is just, for those of you who have not listened to it, it's a tremendous resource and has been so well received and is just a beautiful offering. So I encourage you to check out this latest episode of Soulful Jewish Living, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, also subscribe to our Jewish Meditation for Everyone podcast, which features teachings and practices from our daily set. So if you're leaving us now, we hope we'll see you tomorrow or sometime soon. If you're staying on, you're welcome to join us for conversation with our teacher today, Rabbi Lauren Tuchman. And you can put questions in the chat. I'll keep an eye out for that. If it's a question, as always, please write question in all caps, so that I can identify the questions, or just share your reflections on practice today, or where you're at, anything you'd like to share with our community, you're welcome to do so. And Lauren, let's bring you in here. And again, as always, thanks so much, Lauren. So let's begin with kind of unpacking some of the terminology. Today was a compassion practice, and the English word compassion can mean a lot of things for a lot of people. I think literally it means being with somebody in their suffering and whatever that elicits from us, right? The feeling, that awareness of the pain of others, that there's something within us that wants to relieve pain and suffering. So that's the English. The Hebrew, usually is rachamim, which is, this theme of the week, the third week of the Omer that's coming to a rest now. But I want to ask you, I'll ask you personally, when you engage in compassion practice, as you were inviting us today, what does the word mean for you? Would you say?
Yeah, I would thank you so much for that beautiful question. In my personal practice, when I am working with these phrases, when I'm engaging in blessing practice or compassion practice, as we did today, I find that it is an opportunity for me to open myself to be really with another person, particularly if it's a person that's difficult or a group that's difficult. It allows me to cultivate the empathy, and I say that very directly, the empathy, not the sympathy, but the empathy of being with and trying as best as I can to get through the wall that's in my own heart.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in these times when division is very easy, it's really important, I think, to cultivate this sense of being able to be with. It doesn't mean that we are fully able to understand. There's a lot of anava, right? To think about another quality we think about this time of year. There's a lot of anava around recognizing it's not about understanding. It's not about striving in our, for those of us in Western contexts, in that sense of like, I have to strive. It's the process of opening to the direct experience of feeling, not thinking, of feeling into somebody else's experience without trying to blend ourselves into it and without trying to intellectually understand it.
Let's stay with that for a minute, okay? Because it's interesting because there are a lot of synonyms in Hebrew and in English, right? In Hebrew, we've got chesed, which is the theme of the first week of the Omer. Last week, the second week was Gevura, and the third week is the Sphira of Tiferet, which is associated with Rachamim. So the distinction between Chesed and Rachamim, as I understand it, you were just saying, is that it maintains that distinction between self and others, right? Where in Chesed, it's all connected, it's all one. Maybe empathy plays in there, but compassion is that. I wish I could remember I don't know if you remember your exact words that you just said, but it was about feeling and connecting with the other without blending into them, or something like that, right? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Right. I want to say a little bit about your work, with, the title of this program that you're doing with Kirva, Disability is Soul Care. How would you relate that to the work that you do as a, advocate for those disabilities and disability rights and inclusivity? Like, how does that play into this for you, would you say?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I have really longed for in my own practice is integration, right? Is shlimut.
Mhm,
The notion of being able to bring together all parts of myself
mhm,
in a really authentic way, because I certainly know that I'm not the only person with a disability, I'm sure, in this room, and I'm certainly not the only one,
mhm,
who is very interested in spiritual practice. And that's where disability wisdom as soul care came about.
mhm,
So in that kind of a context, what we're trying to do, the way I'm describing it, it's really rooted in I'm working with an organization that you just named, Smart Kirva, which means closeness. And it's really the notion here is that disability wisdom is part of Torah and Torah is part of disability wisdom, right? That they're not these two distinct things, but actually they come together, and that when we show up fully for practice, we're showing up as ourselves in everything we bring. All of the
mhm,
pieces that make us who we are
mhm,
show up in our sit, they show up in how we practice whatever our practices are, and really being able to anchor in that, to really honor, to say,
mhm,
like, this is it. This is, hineni, this is who I am. And how do I find that practice can really address me, speak to me? Because I believe it really can. I believe it's for everyone. And it's very empowering, I think, to feel like there is a space for oneself, especially when one hasn't felt like there has always been a space for oneself in certain
mhm,
kinds of
mhm.
religious and spiritual communities. I believe very strongly that there doesn't need to be an either or. Either I can be in the activist space or I can be in this other space.
Right.
I'm really finding in my own life really, really moving in a very deep way
Mhm,
towards what I think I've always been moving towards, which is really bringing all parts of myself to my teaching. And
mhm,
that's what I'm trying to do with um, disability wisdom as soul care. And to more directly answer the question, I would say, this is a place of deep non-striving, right? Often I think people with disabilities, myself very much included, sort of feel like our relationship to the outside world is often the metaphors that I'm not going to use given the world we're living in right now, but a lot of them are very centered on fighting and battles and this, that, and the other. And I want us to move away from that because we are conditioned
mhm.
deeply to feel like we are constantly against, like people are not, with us. We're constantly having to strive, burnout, strive, burnout. We live in a very inequitable world. We live in a world that just does not honor the lived experience. And here, what I'm trying to do is say, no, actually, you get to tend to your neshama too. That's not a luxury. It's
Mm-hmm.
not that we have to, it's not that, well, I'm so busy fighting for basic decency that I don't have any time to tend to my neshama. The fact that so many of us feel that way is a symptom of the world we live in. What I'm suggesting instead is not that that isn't true to people's lived experience. It certainly is true to mine. It's certainly true to many. But actually, we don't have to put our neshamot away or on the back burner or get so burned out that we have nothing left. We actually get to take the time, as do all beings, to really care for our neshamas, because how else are we going to be able to continue living in the world as it is and striving for the world we want to bring into being?
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Lauren, I hope you're going to get to go through the beautiful comments in the chat later. A lot of appreciation and a lot of appreciation specifically for this practice today. I'm just going to read Nancy, one of these comments. Nancy wrote, "Thank you so much, Rabbi Tuchman. In my experience, compassion allows someone to understand someone else as what it is and not necessarily agree with it," which I think fits very well with what you were describing. And also, I think maybe makes, given so much fractiousness around Israel in the world and also within our community, that it's makes this a particularly valuable practice on this Yom HaAtzmaut.
Yeah, I want to speak to that for a moment. Thank you, Nancy, for the comment. And what I'd like to say is that, right, there is a lot of fracture, there's a lot of fracture right now in the community because so many of us are holding, as I said in the beginning of practice today, so many of us are holding so many conflicting emotions moment by moment. Forget day by day, moment by moment. And we live in a world where it's just the relentless nature of the information we get. We as human beings don't have capacity to hold everything we're holding. So what compassion practice can allow us to do is to name what it is that I can't hold, not because the other pieces are unimportant, right? I think we live in a culture, there's this notion, there's this, zeitgeist out there that basically says, like, if you're holding X, you can't also hold Y. Or if you're holding Y, then to hold X is somehow disloyal to holding Y, right? But the truth is, we're not separate, right? We're not separate from one another. We feel it deeply. I feel it in my own body. I feel the separation. I feel the isolation. I'm not saying that those things don't exist in the relative plane. Right? They exist in the relative plane. Many of us are feeling that as Jews in the world right now. Wherever we are, wherever we find ourselves in relationship to Israel, or wherever we find ourselves in relationship to our own families, wherever we find ourselves, there's so many pieces to this, right? But thinking about the absolute plane where actually we are all part of this one, home of ours, the planet, how do we begin to break those barriers down that are keeping ourselves separate from one another? It is so easy to throw insults and to use unskillful speech in these days. And it's so easy to get caught up in emotion and, to feel like if I don't do X, Y, and Z, then I'm not in alignment with my higher soul. It's much harder to really ask ourselves, what is it that I want? And how can I extend that yearning, that compassionate practice and presence to others? And I'll by saying on this note that when we lean into division, we get more of it, right? It's like, I think about it and forgive me for this metaphor. I'm doing everything I can to be off of social media more and more. But practice is like the algorithm. The more you give it, the more it gives you in return, right? The more you feed a social media algorithm with negativity and outrage, the more it gives back. The more you feed the world and your own soul with positivity, it again does not erase. We don't engage in aversion, right? We don't engage in spiritual bypassing and say the world as it is not the world as it is. That's not authentic spirituality. We engage as the world is in this moment, moment by moment, but we strive to never forget what we're striving to do, or we're not striving is the wrong word there, but what we're hoping to bring into being through our own action. Because that does matter, even when it feels like it's nothing or a drop in the bucket.
Really beautiful. we're coming to the close, but I want to, what you're saying, Lauren, is bringing up for me. I'm thinking about the refrain in the Torah about the ger, about the strange, the quote unquote stranger, um, in relation to what you were saying earlier about bringing our whole selves and not relegating ourselves. Something about that so much of Jewish identity and practice is based on that refrain of knowing, of empathizing, here, there, it's like, there I'm questioning whether it's compassion, have compassion for the ger, because you know the heart of the ger. Like I wonder if how you relate to those
Yeah.
passages, those phrases, which are, I don't know, they're they're not innumerable, but there are many, many references, that's to Torah, that's like an essential aspect of Torah, right?
Yeah, I think the rabbis say it's like 36 times, right? In the Torah, we have that
Mhm.
reminder.
Mhm.
And, on the one hand, there are so many different ways to connect to that, right? On the one hand, we can think about it as compassion for the ger because we know the heart of the ger, as you said. We have that memory. I don't remember where I heard this recently, but I was listening to a drash, a sermon, and the rabbi said that Jews don't have history, that when modern Hebrew was created, there was actually a word created for history, historia, but we have zachor, we have memory. And I
Mhm.
think that relates directly to what you were saying about knowing the heart. We remember that. It's not distant in the past that we put on the shelf somewhere and come back to it. That's the whole ikar. That's the whole point of the Pesach
Right.
Seder, in fact,
Right.
right? And I think in the context in which I am situated, which is in the United States as an American Jew, I think about how we use that practice of thinking about the ger. I do sometimes worry that we actually have taken it and created it to be a more sympathetic rather than an empathetic practice. So I want us to really engage in a process of reorientation from a sense of sympathy, like we remember the ger, we were that, therefore we do X, Y, and Z. Therefore, we are to treat the ger with compassion or with kindness, and to rather think about the sympathetic place. But that requires of us to open ourselves to our own pain, which many of us don't want to do because we think it's either too self-indulgent, it's minor in the scheme of things. There's, the notion of thinking about, well, pain that I'm in right now and the pain that I've been in over the last 7 months is nothing in comparison to, name many, many groups of people that we could compare our relative quote unquote lack of pain, right? That's the kind of hierarchical thinking, right? That says your pain is less important because it is less immediate or direct. Rather, instead of engaging in that kind of orientation, we can instead say, how do I open myself fully to my pain, acknowledge it for myself? Because then I can really remember and know the heart of the other. If I cannot acknowledge my own experience, then I'm going to be blocked in my ability to connect to other people.
That's again, enrich, appreciate everything you're saying, Lauren. I see a lot of appreciation um, in the chat as well. I read a minute to go. Part of what I'm thinking about a story I read yesterday. I know you're trying to get on social media, so I don't want to drag. I know far be it from me to drag you back into social media. Some of you may follow a journalist, writer in Jerusalem, Sarah Tuttle Singer, who shared a really very moving story yesterday about a Palestinian cab driver who drives an elderly Jewish man to a medical appointment and avoided, in general, doing so on Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Memorial Day, and wound up, basically, cut to the chase, wound up driving this man by himself and pulling over the side of the road when the siren sounded for a moment of silence. Even though was really, it was struck me as like very much what in keeping with what you have been saying, Lauren, about being able to have this compassion for others with whom we we don't share the same experience, and yet there's a common humanity that is expressed. And I see a lot of examples in the chat. I'll send you the full, for those who may not know, you can save the chat by clicking on the three dots in the box, and Lauren, I'll send you the full chat so
Yes, please
you
send that
can
to me.
you can
Absolutely.
go through it. A lot of beautiful reflections in the chat. I want to thank everyone for for those who have chosen to share. And thank you, Lauren, so much for leading us beautifully today, and to practice that we all really need. We need it every day, but I think today is an especially beautiful day for this practice of compassion. I want to thank Ellis. Thank you so much for sponsoring our practice today. I'm really touched and honored by that. And of course, thanks to Jet for holding our ship together and bringing us in for a landing. And we'll look forward to being together to practice tomorrow with Rabbi Dorothy Richmond, who'll be joining us to lead us tomorrow at our usual time, 12:30. So until then, everyone, many, many blessings, and hope everyone stays safe and well.
Thank you